Hey guys, my name's Jess and I'm a tutor at Coding Kids. Welcome to episode 4. This is the second of a two-part series on sprites. Today we'll be looking at the two different types of sprites, bitmaps and vectors. We'll also be showing you how to edit sprites. To quickly summarise what we looked at on Thursday, we gave you a crash course on what sprites are and introduced you to some areas on the interface concerning sprites. Remember that sprites are objects in a program that perform actions. For example, moving across the screen, saying hello, or making a sound. We showed you the sprite pane, where you can find 4 different options for importing sprites into your project. We also showed you the sprite info pane, where you can find detailed information on all the sprites in your project. So let's start this video by talking about the two types of sprites. If you recall, you can import sprites from the sprite library into your project. Remember that here, sprites are sorted into vectors and bitmaps. But what do these terms actually mean? Vectors and bitmaps are two types of 2D graphics. The way in which they are different is how they store their information. Bitmap images, also known as raster images, store color information from every pixel that it comprises. A pixel is a tiny little square that is filled with colour. Let me give you an example to better illustrate what I mean. If you open up an image in a basic graphic editing program like Paint, you'll see what I'm talking about. So open up an image, a photo for example, and zoom in as far as possible. You probably can't see the pixels through our camera, but if you try this yourself, you should be able to see all the different tiny squares of colour that make up the picture. So, just to make sure we're all on the same page, a bitmap image is one that stores information about the colour of every individual pixel that makes up the image. A vector image, on the other hand, stores mathematical formulas that draw lines and curves that make up the shapes in an image. Let me give you an example of a vector image. If you open up a word processor like Microsoft Word, go to the Insert tab, select any shape from the Shapes section, and draw this in your document. Voila, you have your vector. So there's actually no accurate way to discern vectors from bitmaps just by looking at them. But there are a number of important differences between these two different types that can help you figure out whether an image is a bitmap or a vector. Since vectors store mathematical information on how to draw shapes, it's good for images with lower levels of detail or images that are simpler. If you look in the sprite library, sprites like Scratch Cat, Banana, and Shark only really contain discernible lines and curves, as well as only a few solid colours. Since bitmaps store colour information, on the other hand, they are more equipped for images with high levels of coloration detail and large and diverse colour palettes. If you were to take bitmap sprites like Airplane, Jay, and Trampoline and zoom in on all of them really closely in Paint, you can see just how much colour information they contain. Once again, because vectors are based on mathematical formulas, they're very easy to scale. Bitmaps, on the other hand, aren't so well equipped for this. The moment you stretch it too big, they become all blurry and fuzzy. Again, because bitmaps store colour information, they have the tendency to be much bigger file sizes than vectors. Vectors tend to be much smaller in file size due to the fact that they, once again, only really contain mathematical definitions. There's not as much support on the web for vector files as there is for bitmaps. Vector images have the tendency to be converted into bitmaps before they can be used on the web, which is probably why you don't see a lot of support on websites for vector formats like EPS, SVG, and SWF. Most people have never even heard of these file types. You're more likely to see support for bitmap file types such as JPEG or JPG, PNG, GIF, and BMP. To edit a bitmap, you change the colour information of the pixels that make up an image. You can do this in any old graphic editing program, like Paint for example. To edit a vector, you reform the lines and curves that make up an image, and you can do this in programs like Inkscape or Adobe Illustrator. You can see just how easy or difficult it is to edit vectors or bitmaps by attempting to edit a bitmap or vector sprite in the Costumes tab on Scratch. We won't look at everything in this video, but we won't look at everything that you can do in the Costumes tab in this video, but what we do want to introduce you to is the two different editing modes in Scratch, vector mode and bitmap mode. If you go to the Costumes tab, in the bottom right corner, you'll see what mode you're in. You'll also see the option to switch modes if you so desire. If you have a bitmap sprite, you'll be in bitmap mode by default and will have the option to switch to vector mode. The case is likewise for a vector sprite. When you convert between modes, there are different options available for you. For example, in bitmap mode, you can do things like remove the background, use a brush, erase pixels. In vector mode, you can do things like reshape definite lines, use a pencil, and move between layers in an image. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but do have a bit of a play around with the different editing modes to get a better feel for what they do. If you're interested to know more about vectors and bitmaps, we've left a few links in the description for you to have a look through and read. There's lots that we didn't get to cover, seeing as the content is a bit dense, but hopefully we've provided a clearer picture for you on what the difference between the two image types are. Join us on Tuesday for our next video on events and event-driven programming. See you then!